Hey everyone, welcome back to Vertical Playpen, the podcast about experiential education. And I am joined by Kai Westcott today. Now, you may be familiar with Kai once you start hearing and maybe when you see, if you are on the socials and you follow The Vibe with Kai. And the reason I wanted to reach out to Kai is I have been more and more open and honest about my introverted self, essentially work in an extroverted industry. So I've been trying to be more open to that, to make awareness that yes, you can be introverted and still be performative. All right, has very little to do with actual social skill, but more about energy and how we ultimately feel at the end of interactions. And so I wanted to bring Kai on because you have, Kai, such a plethora of background of looking into this now as you've entered this world and you have talked more on the subject and gained following due to your authenticity and honesty around it. So really I wanted to bring you on, and the hope is that we'll achieve maybe one of two things for the listener. One is that they resonate with the message that we're sharing and think, yes, this is me. And we have that kind of moment. And then the second is if those people who don't resonate can be more aware that there are participants in their groups or students that they work with that are feeling the ways that we are feeling. So the intent is somewhat both way. I'm going to start with something though, Kai. I like they do an activity called the story of your name, which like looks at the reasons why we call ourselves what we call ourselves. I want to
Yeah.
start though, because I don't know this. Why is your handle The Vibe with Kai? Do you mind explaining that?
Yeah, absolutely. That's actually a really interesting story. I'm going to make a long story short because it's a long story, but back in 2018, I ruptured my Achilles, and which is like one of the worst things that you can do to your leg, right? Complete rupture, and I was very, very, very down because it was my right leg. I couldn't move. I couldn't uh, exercise. I couldn't drive. I was on the third story of my apartment building, so I couldn't even go downstairs to get the mail. And so I was very depressed. I was very sad. I had lost opportunities, so on and so forth. And it got to a point that I was feeling so low that I knew I had to bring myself up, and I knew I had to rehabilitate myself, not just from a physical standpoint, but from a mental health standpoint. And so I started a blog where I was just talking about some of the things that I was dealing with mentally and physically. And I called it Good Vibes with Kai because the goal was to just spread good energy, and like not just to the world, but to myself, just to kind of validate myself and my journey. And then it turned into The Vibe with Kai in 2020 because Good Vibes with Kai on TikTok was taken at the time by somebody. And so I'm like, I need something else. So I'm like, how about The Vibe with Kai? Because like there's so many different types of vibes out there. Like there's good vibes, there's chill vibes, there's fun vibes, there's sad vibes. Like there's so many different vibes, and I talk about how I'm feeling. So how about The Vibe with Kai? But I will tell you though, because my name is Kai, people will see The Vibe with Kai and they'll think Kai means Kentucky. And so I can't tell you how many times I'll get a message from people being like, so whereabouts in Kentucky do you live? And I always have to respond, I've never been to Kentucky, like on purpose. I've never been. So I'm like, my name is Kai, but I've never been to Kentucky on purpose. So yeah.
I love that. What was that moment for you where, because you started with the good vibes with Kai, that you kind of realized that you were getting more response maybe, or you felt more comfortable sharing some of the bad vibes? Because you talked about like the
Yeah.
vibe, but obviously you were
Yeah.
leaning with good, but then you sort of lent towards maybe being more honest about some of the bad too.
Yeah, absolutely. A lot of people think that the social media side of things for me kind of blew up in the last few years. But what people don't realize is that this has been a journey since 2018. And it was in 2020. So it was 2 years later. I hurt myself in 2018. And from 2018 to 2020, I wasn't really getting much traction, but I also wasn't doing it at the time for anybody else. It was mainly for me. And if anybody happened to see it, then like, so be it. But it wasn't until the world shut down in 2020 that people who were bored at home were like, who is this guy? And then it just kind of started to go up from there. And but even still, it wasn't until I would say 2022 that things really started to blow up. And it was mainly because I found my purpose on social, which was to talk about introversion, to talk about ADHD, to talk about my mental health struggles. It was at that point that things really started to get real for me, and that was mainly because I wasn't diagnosed with ADHD and severe depression, generalized anxiety disorder, OCD. I wasn't even diagnosed with that until 2022. So that is when everything started to really catch on for me publicly.
It's interesting because the reason I think that I maybe even found you is because I had that same sort of experience a few years back of just being a little bit more honest about my anxieties. I have social anxiety disorder, so I take
Hmm.
medication for my social anxiety. And
Yeah,
it's often interesting for people to know that when I present in front of like 500 people on stage. I work with people. I work with humans as a part of my job.
yeah,
And so people are always very confused about that when I say it, as if I'm making it up, you know. And
yeah.
but I would have panic attacks prior to performance, and it was always this like, okay, draining experience that I was always like, I'd do some presentation and then I'd be a week of recovery, and it's like this is not sustainable. And so, how do we talk about this more? And it was the same. I went to see a therapist, and I much more identified. This is what's
Yeah.
happening. I am taking medication, as I believe you are also, and just
Hmm.
being acknowledging like that. That for me has worked, and that
Yeah.
has made my transition into doing some of this much smoother. I'm not dealing with the same
Hmm.
level of anxiety I was prior.
I'm
I
proud of you.
realized I wanted
That's
to,
something to be proud of. That's
yeah,
great. That's something to
and
be proud of.
I wanted to be able to make sure people were hearing this because I was thinking, well, is it just me? And similar, I think, as you're experiencing, you realize how many people have that similar viewpoint.
Hmm.
I want to I want to highlight something that you said in a previous episode of your podcast. So if
Hmm.
you check out the Vibe with Kai podcast, there was a previous episode, in fact, the newest episode, where you were talking about an article about ADHD.
Yeah.
And you made a note, and I wrote this down as what is contributing, I think, to greater numbers of ADHD, people being diagnosed with ADHD or anxiety numbers increasing, is not due to um, there something happening in us that's making us there more anxiety necessarily, but that there is a greater acceptance, I believe, in being able to talk about it. And so people
Hmm.
aren't hiding this back as much. The stiff upper lip,
Correct.
I'm from England, the stiff upper lip kind of mindset of holding all the
Sure.
emotions back is sort
Sure.
of breaking. Is that something you're seeing as well in your interactions, or like a populist growth?
Yeah, absolutely. It's there's more of an awareness now, and more people, particularly women, people of color, and people in the LGBTQ plus community, are being diagnosed. And this is not a trend. This is not like a fad. This is something that is happening because more and more people are speaking out about it. And as more and more people are speaking out about it, people are listening to these stories and they're like, wait, what this person is talking about struggle wise, I struggle with that. Do I have ADHD? Should I get checked? And they kind of go from there. And then next thing you know, come to find out, some of the things that they've been struggling with their entire life can now be attributed to things like ADHD or depression or anxiety, like things that they never thought to get checked out before. Is it always ADHD? No, but what's great is that it's starting the conversation. People are now looking into it because they're able to relate to some of the struggles. I can't tell you how many times I get a message from people being like, "Hey Kai, I saw your video about ADHD, very funny, haha. But just so you know, I went to go I was listening to it. I'm like, I think that's something that I struggle with as well. So I ended up going to my doctor and talking about it. And a couple months later, I'm now officially part of the ADHD community. I'm like, you know what? Congratulations, welcome to the family. And so like that kind of feeling, it's really really cool. More and more people are talking about it. More and more people are having conversations. More and more people are going to their doctors. And just saying, hey, this is something I'm struggling with. I think it might be related to ADHD, and that is why you're seeing a rise in numbers.
Yeah, and it's fascinating as well the number of people who are getting diagnosed as an adult. It's
Yes,
similar with myself. So I've got social
yes,
anxiety. I also got diagnosed with ADHD. Also,
mhm,
it's and I didn't get that until I was in my 50s. And there's many people
mhm,
I've interacted with have similar
yeah,
moments. And I think that it makes me reflect, and this is where my questions are leading now, to myself in education in the school system.
mhm,
So I work with a lot of educators, and there is often sometimes this phrase that educators will say to me was like kids these days, as if the kids these days are X, Y, and Z, and it's making, often it gets the words fragile gets used and other things like that. What I'm fascinated by, and I find this, I actually interviewed a a doctor who wrote a book called Lighthouse Parenting, which is really fascinating. I encourage people to read that book. It's really a positive mindset on healthy risk taking for kids. But he made the statement that our kids are so much more emotionally developed than we ever were,
Amen.
that that is the actual failing. It's not actually kids these days, but it's adults these days. They're the ones who need to think about this. Let's ask you, how was education for you as a kid growing up through school, as it relates to your undiagnosis? But how did you experience school? A struggle? Was it easy? What was it like for you?
Absolutely. First and foremost, that quote you just said is that could not be any more true. It is so, so true. There, like a lot of the younger people that I work with are so much more advanced emotionally, mentally than I ever was at that age. With that said, when I was in high school and even in college, and there was no education when it came to mental health. There was none. We didn't talk about it, especially growing up with a black family in a black community. Like that's just not a conversation that was had. Growing up, I looked up to rappers and hip hop artists. I looked up to my dad. I looked up to athletes. None of them were talking about mental health, right? And like, I'm not sitting here faulting them for it. This is just how society was. Even to this day, it's gotten a lot better, thankfully. But like, there was no education when it came to mental health. So like, the things that I was struggling with, I just thought I was being lazy. I thought I wasn't working hard enough. I thought that I was, just not a good student because I'm just bad. And then I look back at it now that I start to understand how these things affect me, it all makes sense now. Like the signs were there my entire life, just nobody knew because there is a stigma surrounding mental health in general. And the conversations aren't being had, at least not as much as back then as it is now. Like thankfully that people are talking about it now. But like back then, I'm talking about like in the 90s, early 2000s, that was not a conversation. I used to when people would mention mental health to me, I would think of straitjackets. That's the first thing that would pop into my brain is a straitjacket. When I think of a therapist, I would think of, somebody that's like going crazy and manic. That's what I thought of because I had no education. I didn't know any better. And so it was a very much a struggle for me growing up. I didn't realize how hard I had it until I grew up and I started to work on things as an adult. And so I look back at it now, I'm like, man, whew, how did we do it? How did we make it through? And I think that's why there's a lot of people our age that think that, kids these days are weak and sensitive. No, they are emotionally intelligent and they're more in touch with their feelings and their emotions because what we did when we were younger is we suppressed that. We suppressed it. And now we're paying the price for it. Now, the mental health struggles of people in their 30s, 40s, 50s, you can see the numbers rising for the mental health issues because we suppressed it our entire lives. So don't blame these kids. These kids did nothing wrong. They are just emotionally intelligent because people are talking about it now.
Absolutely. And I think that I was working with a school group, and I was talking to some educators, and they were bringing up like a physical weakness as well as just mental, but it was a very derogatory conversation.
I
And
hate that.
I know, and it was wild. And I remember being, and I said to them in the moment, I think that their ability to be able to talk about subjects that you find uncomfortable is their greatest strength. And I think that that's a big awareness that I think educators need to have. If you
Hmm.
were to go back to your childlike self, and I think about this too, of like, I realize I got into the work that I do because I was trying to fix something that I didn't have when I was a kid. I wish I'd had someone who worked with me more individually. Special ed works in individual education planning.
Hmm.
Experiential education is very individualized. It's based on a group, but we look and read the group and see where individuals are at. And I think that that's what I'm often looking for. What do you wish educators, for you as a young student, what do you wish that they had done better, or had done in general
Yeah.
to help you as a child?
And it's really tough because like there's the list is endless, right? I think that to the credit of educators today, because it's different today. To the credit of educators today, the education behind how to help students has gotten so much better. And I wish that back in I sound so old. Back in my day, I wish back in my day, like there was more education for the adults in general in our lives that could have maybe helped guided us a little bit more as opposed to especially, and you know this, especially like ideas of like quote being a man and pulling yourself up by the bootstraps and rub some dirt on it, and like we were taught younger to suppress, and that was just adults in general. And so like I wish that there was more of an education back then, but now there is. Now there's so many educators out there that are educating themselves. And I think what's important is to for educators to focus less on disciplining students and more on the what can I do to help you here, right? And like of course, and that at that point it falls into the student's lap, right? Like at some point, like I always say ADHD is not an excuse, it's a reason. So it's like let's work with it because our our brains for introverts and for ADHDers, our brains weren't built for the world around us. So we have to find a way to work with the world that wasn't built for our brains. So I hope that educators continue to work with ADHDers to just try to like understand what can we do to help you in this situation, because there's some structures that aren't conducive for the success of ADHDers. Like, is there structure? Sure, but it may not be helpful. And so we have to work twice as hard. And so that could be really difficult. So I wish that's what it was back then, but luckily nowadays it's changed.
I think something I want to highlight that you referenced is it's really important that the educators gain education in their own
Mm,
emotions. Um,
yeah.
there's often is buzzwords that get brought up in education at certain points in generations. We are in one at the moment with social emotional learning, and I think that is something we've been doing for many years, but now it's been focused on a little bit more heavily in the school systems.
Hmm.
But I often tell educators there needs to be social emotional learning for the educator before there's ever social emotional learning for the student, because we as adults have to role model that behavior. So in us being more honest and saying like, this is where, I struggle, that is so powerful for the youth to be able to see an adult saying that they're struggling. We don't have to
It's
fake it.
validating.
It's so validating. Absolutely. Hey everyone, Phil here, just interrupting probably me or a guest talking about something profound related to emotions. I just wanted to interject to introduce you to a product by High Five called Emotions by High Five. It is a tool for educators and facilitators designed to enhance emotional literacy, develop essential skills for managing emotions, and facilitate meaningful discussions. Now, each card features a unique emotion or feeling, ranging from joy to sadness, excitement to fear. And the cards cover a wide range of emotions, empowering individuals to identify and understand the feelings and those of others, which promotes self awareness, effective communication skills, and empathy. Now, I have a selection of the cards right here in my hand. This one says cheerful, I've got annoyed, thoughtful, and exhausted. What's awesome about it is there are questions at the bottom that kind of prompt you to be able to have some greater discussion. They also have colors represented around them that tie into the Yale Center for Emotional Intelligence's mood meter. So if you're familiar with that as a tool, these go in alignment with that tool. Also, side little plug to another podcast, but I used these cards with Conan O'Brien on his podcast. Conan O'Brien Needs a Friend. You can find the episode by searching We Got Belayed, and in that you'll hear me talk about those cards or use them in an activity. You can also check out a short video of that on YouTube. But these are probably the best product that we've come out with in a long, long time. We come up with some great stuff, but I am so excited about the potential for these in terms of talking about our emotions. And it's super prevalent, probably to the episode you've been hearing. And so I wanted to tie that in. You can find all the information if you look in the description of this episode. You'll see a link to these cards, Emotions by High Five. Thank you, and let's get back to the episode. In all the time that you've been like focusing on and looking into this and talking to so many people about this subject, is
Yeah.
there have you had mind shifts yourself in the way that you've looked at introversion and ADHD that you're now like, oh, when I was started, I had no idea. Have you had any kind of wild mind shifts recently?
That is a great question, Phil. Wow, I've been on a lot of podcasts. I've never been asked that one before. That's a great question. Wow. Yes, absolutely. In regards to introversion, absolutely 100% because like even though I understood my introversion, I didn't understand that introversion was a spectrum, right? So I thought that my introversion was just introversion. That's just how introverts were. And as I speak to more people, I'm like, oh, wait, you're still an introvert, but you're just a different type of introvert, you know? And so, like, that's changed a lot. In regards to ADHD, yeah, absolutely. Because, like, I was diagnosed in 2022, so it's been 3 years. Um, and even in these short 3 years, I've learned a lot about ADHD and how it affects people. I used to think again that like my ADHD was just how ADHD is for everybody. But again, ADHD is a spectrum. And I've learned how much our society is not built for our brains and how much harder we truly have to work. So, yeah, it's like it's been an ongoing educational thing because I've been able to your point talk to so many people and interview so many people, hear so many stories. I feel like every day I'm learning something new, and like that's such a cool thing, and that's why I love sharing, my platform with people to share their stories and to tell their stories because like I'm like there's so many different things out there that people are managing on a daily basis, and like I think that's really cool. So yeah, I learn something new every day for
Yeah.
sure.
And I think that that's a really good thing to hear because I think that people are often looking for the answer. Like, how do I solve the problem? There's a problem, and that what's the
Yeah,
solution? And I think that that's the hardest part about trying to explain mental health. And there isn't, it's not like physical thing where I'm having to do some push-ups and I will increase my pectoral muscles. Okay, so how will I
yeah,
increase my, you know? And I think that there's no direct answer. But I appreciate you're also willingness to learn and grow and not be stagnant in this. This is how it is because I think that that's
yeah,
sometimes the problem I experience in lots of different
yeah.
ways that they see
And
someone.
if I may, ADHD evolves. So the ADHD that I experienced even as a younger kid, and like it's not the same type of ADHD that I have now. Like I'm the same person, still similar struggles, but like the other things that that always come into consideration is your current situation, your geographic location, your relationships in your life, your job. Like all of these things can evolve your ADHD. So like it's not like is there a quote cure? Is there a cure for ADHD? No. It stays with you forever, but it does change. It does mutate in a way. So that's huge. That's a huge thing that I've learned.
Is there what are some of like your mechanisms, your strategies for when you feel yourself elevating? What is your strategies to try to bring yourself, center yourself back into that? Because I know that for me, when I'm coming up to a moment, I can feel stuff happening. And so if what's your go-to for some of that?
Yeah. I'm very fortunate now that I can understand when the spiral is starting. Right? And that comes from therapy, and that comes from just understanding my body and my brain. I can when I'm starting to spiral, I'm like, "Okay, here we go. This is what I need to do." So there's a couple different things that I do. Number 1, I give myself grace because I understand that, like, there's gonna be days where, like, it's just like it's gonna win. ADHD is gonna win, and like you can't fight ADHD. You just work with it. So like there's gonna be some days that it's just not gonna work out. So give yourself grace and just know that you're doing the best that you can with what you got. The second thing that I do is I ground myself as much as possible. Like quite literally, sometimes if I feel myself start to spiral, I will stop what I'm doing and I will literally look around my immediate area and I'll just say the things that are quite literally around me, right? So I'll be like phone, laptop, clock, microphone, screen, cat. Like I will look at those things and I'll process those things and it legit brings me back to the present moment. because when I start to spiral, like that's when I'll get really anxious and I'll start to either be dwelling on the past or worried about the future as opposed to being in the present moment. So what I'll do is I will just bring myself back to the present moment. And then from there, Kai, give yourself grace. You're doing your best. Take a deep breath. You'll figure this out. You'll get to where you need to be.
I wonder if, and I wrote down in the notes, and I'd said this to you prior, that
Mhm.
I was going to follow Kai's lead and try to be
Mhm.
authentic and honest in this. Has there been a story that you have had? Maybe it's someone who's watched a video of yours and they've interacted because your case study, if it was much broader because of your following.
Mhm.
Has there been someone who's reached out to you and shared something that has brought you emotions, deep emotions? Maybe it's caused you to cry. Like, what has there been something that has anchored you? Because I know that stories and emotions really tie us to an experience. So, has there been something that you could reflect on?
Every day. Every day. I get a story in my DMs, my emails, my comments, and I'll tell you the type of story that I get that hurts
Please.
me a lot. The story is particularly from women who talk about how they were often either misdiagnosed or not diagnosed at all, or their doctor won't believe them when they come to them saying, "Hey, I'm struggling with this," and then they'll get diagnosed with something that is not what's truly bothering them because the doctors will write them off or they'll blame something else. And that's why you see so many women in their 50s and 60s and 70s right now being diagnosed with ADHD. And to hear the stories of these women who went 40, 50, 60 years of their life. Like I got diagnosed when I was 34. Imagine getting diagnosed when you're 68. You go 60 years of struggles, not realizing that you haven't been managing your, in this case, ADHD in a healthy way or at all. And then all of a sudden you start managing it at 68 years old. And now all of a sudden you have this clarity that you never had in 60 years. And now you go through this stages of grief because you're like, did I waste 60 years of my life? And that's when they have to start managing like this, this depression and anxiety because they start beating themselves up. Man, if I would have caught this sooner, how much different would my life had been if I would have caught this when I was your age, Kai? And so like hearing these stories from these women, it's heartbreaking because they look back at their entire life and they regret and they feel bad and they beat themselves up because they wish they would have caught it sooner. And that breaks my heart. It's so hard to hear those stories from those people because at that point there's also an acceptance sometimes, like a sad acceptance. Like I have more days ahead behind me than ahead of me. So nothing I can do now. And to hear that it's truly heartbreaking sometimes.
Yeah, it's interesting because I think that some of the resistance that may come from hearing these numbers or increases and then the phrases
Mhm.
of kids these days and stuff like that, I think it's probably a lack of ability or a desire to find out that you were wrong for how many years you were wrong or didn't know, or there's a lot of lack of control in that. So
Mhm.
I just want to give you credit as well, and in I think that the impact you've probably had on myself has been great because it's allowed me to be, following and Kai's lead. But I think of all those stories that you've probably interacted with, how many people you've had a really positive impact on, and I just want to give you props for that because I think that without people like yourself, we wouldn't be able to have these kind of conversations where two men in their 30s are having conversations about their mental
Yeah,
health. What
it's a beautiful thing.
we're already there, right? We're already getting to that
Yeah,
cresting point
yeah,
where we're having change. And that is, I think, really exciting for me. Also, as someone who works with youth and works with educators, to have these kind of conversations and know that, like, yes, there's a huge push of educators out there who are hearing these stories, relating them to themselves, and changing the way they interact with the youth of today, which is all leaning towards this kind of positive spiral that will probably be beyond our lifetimes, but it will be like we're at that forefront of having these conversations. And I give yourself credit for that. So thank you, Kai.
I appreciate that, honestly. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Yeah. What I'm going to do is I'm going to throw, for those people who don't know and haven't followed Kai, I'm going to throw his socials into the description of this podcast episode. And I encourage you to listen to his podcast also, the Vibe with Kai podcast, because he's having so many conversations with great experts in the fields of mental health and others that are able to help us relate and help us understand ourselves a little better. Also important for our education and also for our students. So thank you so much, Kai, for joining me and being vulnerable with me.
Absolutely. Thank you. And thank you for using your platform for this as well. Honestly, like I don't want to undervalue the significance of two men, especially talking about mental health, because like I said before, these types of conversations weren't had back in our days, and we're having it now. And I hope that people get something really, really good out of this. So Phil, honestly, thank you for using your platform to do what you do and to speak directly a lot of times with these educators and students, and you're changing lives whether you realize it or not. So honestly, thank you.
Thank you, Kai.